While looking for ways to keep myself entertained and taking a break from hundreds of hours of building, I reached out to the community for various challenges to give a go at. And the first one that caught my attention was Embr's 7 days to save a Draugr village. The goal was simple: turn a Draugr-infested village into a home fit for a Viking in just 7 days. I figured this challenge would be an easy one, so I thought I'd give it a go while I eagerly waited for the mistlands to release. The rules of the challenge are pretty simple. You must start with a new character with no skills, no armor, and no weapons. You cannot build outside of the village, which means you must seize a house before you can make a bed, weapons, or any armor. 3. Obviously, no cheats or exploits. 4. The village must be returned to a livable state, which is pretty vague, but we'll just presume this means no holes in the roof or missing pieces. It must be fully reconstructed with some kind of decoration. 5. Must be completed before dawn on the 8th day. And with days being 21 minutes and nights being 9, that gives me exactly 3.5 hours to complete this task. Let's get to it. So it's day 1, and the first order of business is gathering all the base necessities for the things I am permitted to craft. This will include wood and stone, but I'm not going to waste too much time on this early on because it's important to get to the Draugr village and secure a house so I can build a workbench and craft better things. Even though the torch is pretty much your best early game weapon, as it can take out all the mobs and small trees in the meadows with ease, the most important items to gather right now are mushrooms and raspberries. And as I already know I must travel through a dark forest to get to the Draugr village, it would be a good idea to grab some blueberries as well. As I can't set a fireplace and cook until I claim a house, chasing down deer or fighting boar and neck are not all that important. Another thing I took into consideration is that all around the Draugr village there will be scattered deer and boar remains, as this Draugr village is in the meadows and the two creature types are hostile to each other. So there should be some meat scattered about once I'm ready to cook it. Once I arrive in the Draugr village, I knew it was important to scout out the houses to figure out which one would be the easiest to claim. Experience told me that the small houses do not tend to have spawners in them, and most of the time the Draugr are on the outside. With a few bits of stone and wood gathered, and my hammer at the ready to lay down a workbench and block off the doorway, I went for it. The plan was to hold down the fort just long enough to craft what I could and establish a bed, then hightail it out of there to gather more resources. However, when you're working against the clock, it only takes a few wrong moves or not looking before you leap before you wind up doing the walk of shame. While death isn't that big of a deal, it's quite a long walk back to the Draugr village, and this means the clock is burning away. After dying a few more times, and even trying to hold up in a small church, only to be sniped from an open window, I started to realize this challenge was not going to be a cakewalk, and I would need to be more strategic. After many attempts, I was able to finally claim the house, do some quick repairs, clean up my corpses, and end the day on a warm note. On day 2, I got hard to work gathering flint, wood, and scouting the area for deer and boar remains, only to return to my house to find out the Draugr had broken in. I quickly patched up the hole, cooked up the meat I had gathered, and crafted a few items, all while repairing the walls continuously to make sure no more Draugr broke through. While catching up on some rest, I scouted out my situation and noted I seemed to be pretty surrounded, and I was still without a bow. I needed to first upgrade my workbench, but I had to gather more resources to build the cutting block. Once that was placed, I then realized I didn't have enough leather scrap, so I crafted what armor I could and set back out to find more boar. Nightfall came and made it a bit more challenging, bringing skeletons and grave dwarfs along for the ride. While I tried to gather enough boar hide for a bow, I was also racing against the clock. It seemed like I was having no luck with boar spawns at all. By day 3, I found myself still running around all morning looking for boar. But once I gathered the last bit of scraps I needed, quickly raced back to the house to craft a bow and get to work on clearing the village. Once I had my bow at the ready and a bundle of arrows crafted, I decided the best initial course of action would be to take out the free-ranging Draugr from a high window. I did note that there were quite a few archers, so I felt like this was my best chance of success. And while it did take a bit of time, I had to remember my bow skill was very low, and I was using what arrows I had gathered along the way, plus the wood ones I had crafted. I used a combination of shooting arrows and setting fire pits to take out all the Draugr. During the battle, a wall came down on the building next door, and inside was a body pile. So I also took this opportunity to destroy that from my makeshift window. Once the main area of the village was cleared out, it was safe to quickly scout and plan my next course of action. The layout of the Draugr village was perfect. Most of the doors on the house were shut, but during my first few attempts to claim a house, I noted which buildings contained body piles, which spawned the Draugr. I figured I'd start with the house I cleared the body pile out of already, since it was also the closest one to my claimed house. I got to work repairing and replacing walls, and noted these buildings were highly damaged and would require quite a bit of wood and time to fix. I quickly ran out of wood and took off back into the forest to gather more. My strategy was to focus on picking up sticks and breaking small trees, as I felt with my current tools this would be the fastest source of wood. Once I returned to the village, I started working from the outside, replacing the lower and upper roof pieces and repairing everything I saw damaged along the way. I quickly ran out of wood again after only placing a few build pieces and decided it was time to craft a flint axe and try using a method of wood harvesting that always worked well for me. This method was just simply finding a cluster of trees, and rather than just focusing on one tree until it's completely broken down, instead run around to make all the trees fall on top of each other, saving you both time and stamina. After gathering all the wood I could carry, I quickly ran back to the village in the dead of night to continue building. I decided while gathering the wood that it would be a good idea to run around to each building and start replacing like items. This might make the overall building process go a bit quicker if you're not constantly changing through the build piece. But alas, my ADD took over and I found myself straying from that plan, and mainly focusing on 2 houses, which were both partially completed by the end of day 3. It's now day 4 and I've got approximately 2 hours to complete this challenge. That might seem like a lot of time, but I still have 4 more houses to clear Draugr from, and all of the houses have extensive damage, so every minute of that time is going to be needed. I started the day off once again out of wood and needed to return to the forest to gather more. I had to stop and get rested quite a few times, but made sure not to dilly-dally much and get right back to work. I returned from the forest to discover a few Draugr had broken out of one of the houses. Some of them were archers. I used the terrain and stones to hide from their arrows, and I picked them off one at a time. I patched up the whole building and cleared out the rest of the free Draugr. By midday, I got back to work on the village and decided to run around and repair some walls so more breaches didn't occur. I also decided it was time to start clearing out the other building. And on the second house, I decided to destroy the body pile before opening the door. I used the jumping method of shooting to slowly tick its health bar down, and when that didn't work so well, I found a good angle to shoot the thing from an opening in the building. Once the body pile was cleared up, I flung open the doors to take care of the Draugr inside. After clearing the building, I moved on to building number 3. With this one, I took a different strategy and barricaded the door with workbench. I hoped that without a direct path to me, it might cause them to ignore the workbench long enough to at least clear out the body pile. However, I took an arrow from one of the archers, which nearly killed me and made me rethink my strategy a bit. Trapping one of the Draugr in a very uncomfortable position, so I could take care of him separately from the rest of the group, I decided to take a break from the killing and go back to doing a bit of building. You know, because that's a perfectly normal thing to do. After mostly completing the building, I decided to go look at another building to check out some details, completely forgetting I had not cleared it out yet. I quickly closed the door and ran like a scared little child, only to then remember I was a die-hard Viking and beelining it straight for a roof. After all, it was an elite. When that didn't work, because you know, well, stamina, I realized I was going to have to take these fools down with a traditional cat and mouse style kill game. One of them chased me all around the village while the other attempted to circle around and cut me off, but decided he was more interested in the workbench than me just long enough for me to evade this well thought out trap. The 2 of them eventually grouped back up, and I was able to slowly take out the elite whilst maintaining just enough HP to die in one hit. The other Draugr eventually ran off into the woods, and I quickly got back to rebuilding. I could tell the sun was getting ready to start setting, and that meant nightfall was coming. As the night started to settle in, and I started second guessing a few of my build piece choices, I heard a noise and saw one of the buildings taking damage. Just as I went to investigate, bam! I take an arrow to the chest. After a quick look around, I discovered the building I had barricaded with the workbench had been breached, and the Draugr were pouring out into the town center. I quickly got to work clearing out the body pile, noting that there was a stuck melee Draugr and an archer Draugr in the back. So I used the wall as a shield just to peek out and shoot and avoid the arrows from the Draugr, keeping an eye out for any of the stragglers to return. I was right, and after a short while, the Draugr started coming towards. I stopped a moment to take them out and then quickly finished off the body pile. This freed up the last Draugr, who was an elite who proceeded to chase me all around the village while being turned into a pincushion. But eventually he caught up to me and killed me in one hit. Joke's on you though, bud. Nothing stays dead long in the afterlife. I quickly regathered my body, equipped my bow, and finished the elite off naked. I then got back to rebuilding the village, as I had spent half the night fighting those Draugr, and this was time I couldn't afford to lose. I split up my time working on 2 buildings, partially completing both, and finishing my day off in the forest gathering more wood, which in retrospect was not the smartest idea, because nothing burns time like needing to deal with a party of great. I decided I didn't have the time to deal with them, and I didn't want them chasing me around around for the next 20 minutes. So I led them down into a swampy area I found near the Draugr Village and let the Draugrs take care of it. On the 5th day, I started my morning off on a hunt for core wood, which only comes from pine trees and dark forest. Once the sun was coming up, dark forest would be a bit safer as long as I didn't run into a troll. After finding a few pine trees and quickly getting to work making them fall on top of each other, I gathered enough wood to get back to the village and get back to building. Again, employing the strategy of going around and placing similar pieces on all the buildings, such as all these half poles, and man are there a lot of them. By mid-morning, I started working on rebuilding structure 4. Yeah, I know, 1, 2, and 3 are still not complete, but trust me, there is a method to my madness, or at least that's what I tell people. Really, I was just trying to complete all the more difficult tasks first, and honestly, I couldn't say that I achieved that. Sitting in front of the fire, it was a long and tedious process, and I had to stop and cook food and get rest. By the middle of day 5, I was ready to clear out another building so I could run through all the basic repairs there. I decided to go with the same strategy of barricading the door off. I felt like that worked well, and proceeded to try taking out body pile. This building has several Draugr archers, which made it a bit more difficult to get clear shots without taking an arrow in return, and eventually dying. You know, I was considering trying this as a hardcore challenge, but so far I've died at least 5 to 7 times, so I'm not sure about that anymore. After cleaning up my shame and learning that these Draugrs have also broken free while I was recovering, I found myself in another cat and mouse game being chased around the village by 3 Draugr this time. I tried using the roof to get the upper hand, but archer Draugrs don't care where you are, and eventually they got me again. At this point, when you die this many times, you start questioning all the things you did in life. The choices you've made, that one kiss that never happened. Wait, what are we talking about? Anyway, time to recover my body. After luring the Draugr over to the other side of the building, I was able to successfully return to my corpse just to die. Yeah, this is starting to become a thing, isn't it? Like, just dying a lot. Okay, so that was a failure. But luckily, just like Tony Stark, we learned from our mistake, and I was able to quickly recover my shame for a second time. I suited back up and got to work clearing out the loose Draugr, only for Valheim to do what it does best and send me a big old fuck in the form of an X-Year raid. Yeah, because I didn't have enough to deal with already. Really, Devoid? I'm looking at you. Although, like the cicada plagues of Egypt, this turned out to be a gift, as the Draugr were also hostile to these creatures, causing a bit of distraction on both sides. But once that distraction was over, I was able to return to clearing out the final house, which also seemed to have Draugr stuck in the back, making it rather simple, just a bit time consuming. Now that the village was clear of Draugr, it was time to double down on rebuilding the village. I had spent more than half the night clearing out the last house, and time was quickly running out. By the end of day 5, I was still nowhere near done rebuilding all the houses in the village, and I only had 2 days left, or 1 out. On day 6, things get serious. I start gathering more core wood, not for building, but because it was on this day that I remembered I still needed 2 pieces of iron to build a stone cutter, and that requires both a trip to the swamps and a trip into a dungeon. But first, I had to run all the way back near spawn and kill X-Year. Not only did I forget that I needed iron, but I also managed to forget I needed a pickaxe too. So the first course of action was to dispatch X-Year as quickly as possible, then hightail it back to the swamps and find some iron. To find the iron, my plan was simple. 1. Craft a stone sledgehammer. 2. Piss off everything in the swamps with a lot of noise. 3. Die a few times. 4. Hope that it's a muddy scrap pile and not just a tree root. And 5. Finally obtain 2 scrap pieces of iron. If you'd like a complete guide on this process, there's a link in the description below, but just wait till the end of the video and I'll share it there. Next, I needed the core. These I would yoink from a dungeon. I only needed 5, as I left some meat on the spit to turn into coals, so I won't need a kiln and a smelter, just the smelter. I was really hoping that the dungeon I took note of has all 5 cores, and it isn't one of the smaller ones with only 1 or 2, or maybe even none. I could lose a lot of time on this challenge trying to find other dungeons, or even fail it entirely because of this oversight. But after easily dispatching the enemies within, and finding all 5 cores, I was ready to smelt the scrap iron and get back to work building while they smelt. I ended day 6 on a high note, feeling hopeful that I might be able to complete this challenge with only 30 minutes left to go. On the final day, the sun shined over the forest as I restocked my wood supplies and then quickly set back to hastily finishing as many of the houses as I can. I knew at this point it would be a continuous mad dash between gathering wood and stone and trying to make sure to get every piece replaced correctly. Now that my iron was ready, I was able to place a stone cutter and start putting fireplaces in as well, finally restoring light and warmth to this once great village. I wasn't quite sure what the very top of the roof was supposed to look like, as I don't believe I've ever seen one intact, and there wasn't any intact in this village. So I made some quick decisions, knowing the more time I spent trying to figure things out, the less time I had in actually building it. While I presume many of the buildings will not manage smoke well, I was working against the clock. The rash decisions were made, with relatively little interruption. The last 15 minutes were pretty much me running around like a madman, trying to repair and rebuild as much as I possibly could. I knew when night fell, that meant I had roughly 9 minutes finish up, and I could tell I was at least halfway through my last day. I still had several roofs to finish and hearths to place, but I was quickly running out of wood, so I had to frantically run back into the forest several times to get more while dealing with Grey Dwarfs trying to burn my clock down. At this point, yeah, I'm convinced the Grey Dwarfs are in on it and trying to make me lose this challenge. As I finished up on another building, I then decided it was time to move on to the little houses on the outskirts and decorate them up a bit. After completing the first little house, I then realized the first building I started on wasn't even completed. So as night was starting to set in, I got to work finishing the first house as quickly as possible, but was interrupted by a slime that must have wandered up from the swamp. I am kind of surprised nothing else wandered up and that no trolls bothered me this entire challenge. After dispatching the slime and finishing off the roof, I'll be completely honest, I thought I was done. Luckily, I ran back to the house I had claimed early enough to realize, well, that one needs touched up too. So I frantically put in a floor and finished up the repairs on my own house, and then decided to go inspect the rest of the village, just to make sure I didn't miss anything out. With only minutes left on the clock, I discovered there was a house that still needed a lot of repairs. It didn't even have a roof! What was I going to do? My hands began to sweat as I frantically started building. Was this house going to be my downfall? Was I going to complete this challenge in time? Are these questions really as mysterious as I'm making them out to be? Once again, another Grey Dwarf showed up trying to slow my progress. I knew at any moment the sun's rays would start lighting up the sky, and that would mean I would be down to my last few moments. So I jumped up on the roof, finished off the very top, and as I placed the last piece, the sky began to glow a soft glow. The sun was rising. Embr came as a last-minute gift to halt my success, but he was too late. Time had run out. A new day had begun. And with that, we take a look at what was completed. Did I finish all the houses? Did I replace every missing piece and make each one ready for move-in? I'll let you be the judge as to whether or not I completed this mission successfully. Be sure to leave a comment below with how you think I did. After going back and looking at my work, it was not flawless. There were still a few buildings that needed to be repaired, a workbench or two left behind, and some of the buildings only had a hearth and not much else in the way of decoration. So not my best work. And I will say this was a really fun challenge. And I recommend if you're looking for something fun to do, give this challenge a try. I thank Embr for posting this challenge and my community for presenting it to me. Now of course, I can't just leave a build challenge looking this way. With a snap of a finger and a few dev commands, I present to you my finished Draugr Village. Here we have the first building, an ode to the weaving women, worked so diligently on crafting our clothing. And what village is complete without a mead hall, a place to wet your whistle and drown out the sorrows of the day? And lastly, we have the war room, where all the warriors of the village would plan their next raid. If you're obsessed with Valheim like me, make sure to smash that like button. And if you want to see new videos when they first come out, make sure to hit subscribe. Thanks for watching.